Hi, my name is Michael, and in this video, we're going to be looking at Fig, what it is, and how you can get it running in your application. So the diagram you can see on the screen there, we've got the major components for Fig. There's the Fig API, and that talks back to an SQL database where it persists all of its state and settings. The API itself is stateless. Then we've got the Fig client NuGet package, which can be embedded in any application. And once that's done, Fig will start managing the settings for that application. And then we've got a Fig web application, which is the front end for Fig, which is where you update and manage the settings across the domain. So what Fig's doing for you here is giving you a centralized point for managing settings across a number of applications. And this will simplify the management of configuration for large numbers of services across multiple environments. Okay, so what we've got here is a pretty standard app. It's the one that comes out of the template when you ask for a web API. We've got a weather forecast controller that returns a number of random weather forecasts. And all I've done to it is to add in Serilog to give us some logging. If we start this app up, we can see, if we try it out, we are getting a number of random weather forecasts coming back through. So as we start developing this application, we might develop the need for some configuration settings in the application. So to do that, to add that support, we can go in here, create a settings class. We'll populate that with some properties. And here we've got a couple of properties we need to create as well. So create an enum and another class here. And we'll populate some values. Our mapping can have these values and our enum, these ones. So let's have a look what we've done here. We've got a settings class. It's got a username, password, role, timeout, a set of mappings. And if we have a look at what those mappings are, we've got an input, an output, and whether this is enabled or not. So the way that we could set these, the kind of standard way, is to put some values into the app settings.json file. So let's do that now. So grab these ones, paste those ones in. Now we've got some default values for this file. And then the last piece of the puzzle here is to go into the program.cs, and we need to add in some code here to let dotnet know that we want to configure this settings class with the configuration that comes in that is populated from our app settings.json, as that's automatically added as a configuration source from this web application.create builder. So now if I add in I'll put a breakpoint here, add in the settings. If we run our application again, we should see that our settings have been populated from our app settings.json file. And here we can see we've got a username, password, and we've got a couple of mappings populated here as well. Okay, so at this point, we've got a functioning application. We've got configurable settings that are set by an app settings.json file. However, we might want to manage these settings centrally, because if we start deploying multiple copies of this application, or we start deploying multiple applications, it can be cumbersome to have to configure these from multiple app settings.json files, or other places where you might configure it, such as the environment variables. So let's take a look at what needs to happen to get Fig up and running. So the first thing we want to do with Fig is we want to go into our NuGet packages for this solution, and we want to have a look for fig.client. And we can install this one. Once Fig client's installed, we need to add in some additional configuration into our program.cs. So what we're going to do is we're going to override the builder.configuration file, and we're going to re-add back in our app settings.json. That's not strictly necessary, but then we're also going to add in a add Fig extension method here. And we'll add in the logger factory as well. And by adding in the logger factory, we get logging occurring when Fig makes requests. Now you can see here that it's complaining that settings does not implement settings base. So if we come back into settings, we need to extend a base class here, settings base, and that drives some certain dependencies. We need to have a validate method. So we'll add that one in. And we also need to have a client description. We add that one in. So the client description is basically a text description of this client, what this is, and this will be fed as information for those using the Fig web application. The validate method allows Fig to check the settings to make sure that they have valid values, and this information can then also be fed back to the web API. And we can see here, we're basically just checking our validation errors. In this case, I've got one condition here that the request timeout should be greater than 0. And then we check that. And if we find an error, we can set that status. Okay, so once we've done that, we also need to tell Fig that these settings are managed by Fig. And we can do that by adding a setting attribute above the setting. And for each setting attribute, we need to add in a text description of what this setting is and what it does. And now this text description can be anything. It can be free text here, but we also support Markdown. And importantly, it can also draw from Markdown files stored as resources within the application. So if you want to have Markdown files in the application that document what this application does, and you want to then draw from that because you've got already descriptions about how all these different configuration parameters, Fig can use that and save you the hassle of writing this information down twice and trying to manage keeping those two bits of information in sync. So now we've got all of our settings coming in, and we can come back to our program.cs, and we might also want to add in a couple of extra attributes for Fig. So these two here allow our application to do validation. So we're basically calling this validate method in the settings when the settings change, and then that will pass that information back to the Fig web API. And also we're giving restart support, so we can restart this application remotely. These aren't required, but they add additional functionality in with Fig. You can also see here we've set a client name, and in this case it's a sample app, and this can be anything. This will be the name that your client uses when it's managed within Fig. Okay, so now we've done all this, where we need to kind of set up the rest of the Fig infrastructure so that we can start managing our application with Fig. Okay, so before we dive in and actually set up the Fig infrastructure, it's worth having a look at the final state we're going for here. In this case, I'm running the API and the web application in WSL, Windows Subsystem for Linux, and we're running them as Docker containers. You can run this in Docker Desktop or any other place where containers run, but I'm just running it in WSL because that's the easiest setup for my local machine. Then I've got an SQL database which is installed on my local machine. That's SQL Server. I've got my sample app that we've been creating earlier in this video, and that's got the Fig client NuGet package, and it will talk to the Fig API running in the container. And then we need a couple of environment variables for this Fig client to work. The first is the API URI, and this points the client towards the API, so it knows where to talk. And we also have the Fig sample app secret, and this is an encrypted value, encrypted with data protection API, and that is what Fig will use then to talk to the API and for subsequent requests. Basically, it registers the first time the API will record this secret, and then it needs to use the same secret on subsequent requests. We can use the DP API client that comes with as part of the Fig release to encrypt the secret before we put it into the environment variable. So with that being said, let's get onto it. So the first thing you'll want to do is go to the repository here, the Fig repository, and clone the code or take a download of it. We'll be using the Docker Compose as well as a number of things in the scripts folder here. Once you've done that, you'll want to go to your SQL server and you want to enable TCP/IP connections. And this allows the Fig API running in WSL to be able to talk into the local machine and to SQL Server within the local machine. Once you've done that, we can go into our Windows subsystem for Linux, and we can do a Docker compose up, and we can see that the Fig setup container runs, creates the database, and then exits. And if we just scroll up here, and then the Fig API connects to the database and starts performing the migration and sets everything up. And then once that's up and running, the web client also starts up. So at this point, we can go to localhost 7148, and we need to make sure this is not HTTPS at this stage. And we can see that we get to the login page. And after we wait just a moment, we'll hopefully see this transfer to online. Now it's connected, and we can log in with admin, and now we are logged in with the Fig client. We don't have any clients registered as yet, and we can also, if we go to the users section, we can update our admin user password. It is also possible to force this password change on initial login for production sites. Okay, now in order for our application to be able to talk to the Fig API, we need to set up these environment variables that we talked about. So to do that, we can come across to our system properties, we can click in environment variables, and we can see that I've actually already got the Fig API URI set up. In this case, I've got multiple values. It supports multiple with a comma separated, but a single value is also fine. And then we're going to need to create a new secret environment variable for our application that we're building. So if we come back to the application, sample app, we can see it's called sample app. So we need to make sure that's included in our environment variable. So it'll be Fig sample app secret. And then we can come over to our DP API client. So you can download that from the release, the Fig release, and I've got it here. And we can just get generate secret, and that just generates a random GUID for us. We don't need to worry about what this value is. We only care about the encrypted value. We click copy on there, and we can paste that in and hit OK. And now that's there. Now, one good thing to know is that if you want Visual Studio to pick up that environment variable, you need to restart Visual Studio in order for it to pick it up. So if you're running debug, you need to have restarted your Visual Studio for that environment variable to be picked up. Okay, so now we've got all the pieces in place to start using Fig with our sample app. So let's give it a try. So I've just clicked the run at the top here, and our application will start up. And in this case, you can see that it registers with the Fig API at a particular address. It registers successfully, and then it applies 5 settings, and then it starts running. And now we get our weather forecast. So if we come back into the Fig application and we just refresh, we can now see that our sample app is there and we have a little 1 next to it to indicate that there is one running instance of it. If we select it, we can see our settings displayed here. Just expand that out. Oops. Expand that out so it's easier to see. And if we go over to our connected clients, we can see our sample apps there. It's running the latest version of the settings, and it's been up for 43 seconds at time of 52 seconds now. Okay, so going back to our settings page, we can see that we've got a few different editors. We've got a data grid editor, we've got a text editor, but it's not really ideally set up here. We know this is a set. We can choose this from a fixed set of values, and we can also really want this to be more protected as a secret rather than just left in a plain text field. So we can start to do some work on these settings to improve the way they display. So we'll stop the application and we'll come over back to our settings. And we'll start adding some additional attributes to make this a better user experience. The first one we'll add is the secret attribute. And this tells Fig that this is a secret value and should not be pushed down to the web application when it's loaded. We'll tell the Fig that this is going to be have valid values, and we'll pass in the type login role, and that'll allow us to pick from a drop down. We probably want the user to be specified, so we can set in, we can add validation, and we can add in a custom regex and an explanation for that. But we have a set of sort of predefined regexes which we can use, and we'll just pick not empty for this one because it does need to be specified. We could also add in, because we've got some validation here that this should be greater than 0, we can add in some validation here, greater than 0. And let's see if there's anything else we might want to add. We might want to add also some validation to these ones. So we might add not empty for these ones. And maybe that's a good start. So now we've made those changes, we can run our application again. And once this is running, we can see this is now dropped back to a 0 because the running instance wasn't there anymore. If we reload our browser, we can see that our password field is now got a sort of a not set and a password entering box. And if I start entering a password, we can see that it gives us a rating for this password, and I need to enter in something that matches, otherwise it won't accept it. And now I've changed this value, we can see we've got a modified here, and we've got a 1 up here indicating that there's one unsaved change. Our role box has now got a drop down for us to choose from, and our user has a validation saying that the value cannot be empty. If we add a new row here, we get similar validation. If I was to save this row, we get a value that the output cannot be empty. If I start typing in here, this validation disappears. And if I tab out, we can see that we've got a modified for this one as well. Now we also had, if we go back to our code, we had a validation error that the request time at milliseconds should be greater than 0. So if we go back to Fig and we make this one -10, this error appears saying that it should be greater than 0. But we don't prevent the user from entering this value, and that's because perhaps there's a logic error in the code, and this maybe should work with a value of less than 0. So we don't sort of prevent them from saving this, but we do display the error to them. So I've made a few changes. I'm going to hit save. And here we can see a dialog box. The first thing we see is what environment we're pushing to. And this is our development environment. We're saving changes. There'll be four changes to be saved. We can see what they are. We can see their values. And we can see that there's going to be 1 out of 1 live reloading. So what this means is we've got one connected client here, and we've got a live reload option here. I can turn this off, and then this setting won't be pushed out to that client. If it restarts, it will get the new values, but any running instances won't get it pushed. And this way we can do selective pushing of settings for particular instances. I can put an optional message in here and hit save. And now our setting has been pushed. If we go to the connected clients, we can see it's not running the latest right now, and it polls every 30 seconds. So if we pull up our log window here, we can see that it's updated now. So if we refresh, we are now running the latest version, and that value is now true. And we can see that it's logged an error here saying the request timeout should be 0 or greater. And our new values there. Okay, so we can improve this a little bit more, I think. So if we come back here, we can see that the ordering is a bit strange. Probably want the username and password to be grouped together, but in this Fig web page, the user's right at the bottom and the password is here, and that's because they're alphabetically sorted. So we can add in an order. We can say 1, and we can take the password and we can say 2, and we can perhaps do the rest of these, 3, 4, and 5. And then this request timeout, this is something that probably we're not going to change. The default's probably fine. So we can mark this as being advanced, and we'll see what effect that has when we push it out. So if we now update our settings again, and you'll note that each time I push out this new version of the settings, the definitions of these update, but the values that we've entered in previously, they are kept. So if we refresh again, we've got our sample app, and we can see that our values are there, but it's now been reordered, and we've only got 4 settings instead of 5. And the reason for that is that if I toggle this one here, it turns on our request timeout. But by default, the request timeout is hidden, and that's because we want to declutter the interface. We want to have the person doing the configuration focus on the settings that are most important. We also have a filter box up here, so I can start filtering for mappings, for example, to get that. And I can also search in here for this one. And of course, there's only one app, but if there was multiple ones, it would start filtering those ones down as well. There are a few other functions here. So we have the ability to expand and contract these to more of a collapse view, and we can do this on an all basis. And we can also color the side here of the different categories. So we can do that in a moment. We can also click the client description here. And at the moment, this is very blank, but we'll look at improving that in a moment. There's some options for changing the client secret if we want to do that in runtime, as well as adding an instance. So if we have multiple copies of the sample app and we want one of them to have a different set of settings, we can use this instance option. Okay, so let's look at this documentation and the categories thing now. So we come back here, we might want to add in categories. Perhaps this one is going to be category, and we'll give it a name, login, and we can give it a color, and we can specify a predefined color, or we can put in a hex string to indicate some specific color. And this one also probably log in. This one might be give us a different color. Okay, and now we can also improve our text here. So Fig supports plain text, but it also supports Markdown. So we can put Markdown in here. So let's do that now. If we were to bold this, for example, and Markdown's also supported in the setting area here. So if I just bold this one as well, just to see what that will look like. So let's run that. And now we can see that, it italics it rather than bold. If we have a look here, once again, it's in italics rather than bold. But we can also see we've got these categories down the side. And if I hover over them, I get a tooltip saying what category it is. And if I can hold down the control key and I click on the top, you can see the whole category collapses down or expands up. So you can now kind of work with the whole category as a group. But of course, it's not a great user experience to have to enter in Markdown in here. So a much better approach is to use a Markdown file. So to do this, we can go to our sample app and we can add a new item, and we'll call this doc.md, or maybe readme. And this can be anywhere, it doesn't have to be in the root folder. And then we can put some Markdown in. So I've got a bunch of Markdown, and Visual Studio hopefully gives me some previews of how this looks. And now we've got a bunch of Markdown in here. So let's say, for example, I want to put in some headings for our settings. So we've got user, password, and let's say that we want maybe so we've got a couple of headings in here. So then we can come back to the settings file, and instead of referring here, we're going to refer to this, we're going to reference this Markdown file. Now to do this, we need to change the build action to be an embedded resource. And once it's an embedded resource, then it's accessible from within the software. So we need to give the fully qualified path. So we do a $sign here, and then we do sample app dot readme dot md. And what this does is it loads in, it'll search for this document and load it in. Now we can also use this for the descriptions in the settings. But we might not want to display the whole description. So what we can do is we can call out just this heading, and it doesn't matter what sort of heading it is. We just do a hash and then the name of the heading, and then we can do the same again down here. In this case, it'll be password. Okay. The other thing we might want to do is tell Fig if something is live reloaded or not. So we've got an extra parameter here, whether it supports live update, and this will tell the user through the use of these little lightning symbol whether a setting will be applied without restarting the application or not. So if we run up the application again, we can see now our sample app has some nice rich text descriptions with bullet points and things for the user and the password. And if I go to the client descriptions, we get a really nice set of different text here that shows you different ways that some Markdown is displayed within Fig. We can also show images, but they need to be encoded inside the Markdown file. It doesn't support references, of course. Not all Markdown functions are supported. As you can see here, you might expect some maths to get its own special syntax, but for the most part, all the basic Markdown functionality is supported here. And I would recommend using this feature because it means that you can document once and then have that documentation both shown in Fig, but also in the repository where your code is. So there's a whole heap more to Fig that we haven't talked about. There is some support for webhooks. There's support for lookup tables where we can have a definition for something in our application that maybe is not so user-friendly, and then you can use a user-friendly enum to provide a sort of a drop-down support out of the box for a custom setting. We've also got some options to do different configurations, allowing offline settings. We can do some overrides of client setting values. We can do memory leak analysis out of the box. There is support for some experimental support for Azure Key Vault, and also overriding the poll interval for all clients. We can import and export from the system, so we can export the settings both in a sort of a small version with just key value pairs, as well as the large version which has all the metadata, and we can import that back in as well. And we can also generate a report. If I just download this one and open that up, we can see here our report shows us which applications are running and also gives us a full description of all the settings and all the documentation for those clients. So it can be a really handy way of accessing the information within your application. So that's been a quick overview of Fig. There's lots more features that we didn't explore in this video, but please have a look at the documentation on figsettings.com for more information.